Welcome to my first video in my series of how to crochet with Emma's Crochet Group for Complete Beginners and Beyond. Today we're going to be going through the basic equipment required to learn to crochet, different types of yarn for learning with, and how to do a slip knot. So first of all, we're going to be looking at different types of hooks required. Some people will call these hooks, some will call them needles, some will call them sticks. That's totally up to you. Here is a small selection of my crochet hooks. There are lots of different types available. The ones you tend to find most often are your plain basic metal hooks, but you can get ones with various different styles of handles. Personally, I find going for a crochet hook with a nice handle on it will make life easier for you because you get more control over your hook and less discomfort in your hands if you're crocheting for any period of time. My personal favourite at the moment is my Boltec ergonomic handmade wooden hook. I find this one works best for me because I hold my hook in what's known as a knife grip. I find with the hooks with just the metal handles, for example, that I get a lot of discomfort down my ring finger and my little finger. So I find that having a hook with a bigger handle is far more comfortable for me. So I'm going to be using this Boltec hook for today's tutorial. So I'm going to put the others to one side now. Other equipment that you might find useful when learning to crochet are having stitch markers. Now here's some of my stitch markers. These are really useful for finding your first and last stitches, counting stitches, holding onto your yarn at the end of the row so when you put your project down it doesn't unravel. You can clip one of these into your last stitch. There are very many different styles of stitch markers. You get your plastic ones, you get lobster claw and earring back type ones. Most of mine are. I tend to use those the most, mainly because they're pretty, to be honest. You can get just safety pin type style plain ones there. You can even use different coloured yarn, just put it through the stitch that you want to mark. It's all personal preference. A lot of crafting is down to the individual and what works for you. But you will find having some of these is really useful. So I would recommend buying a set of stitch markers of some sort. Other thing you might find useful to have is to have a stitch counter or a row counter. Mine's a little electronic one. You can obviously write it down with pen and paper, but I find these ones are quite useful for counting your rows because you can just click them as you go. They're really cheap. This one comes on a ring band so you can wear it as you work. They are quite handy to have. Again, it's not essential, but they are useful. Another thing that's really useful to have is a pencil for making notes. One of those or a pen. Pencils are handy if you've got a rubber at the end because you can rub out as you go if you need to. Something to make notes in. I've got a Stationery Geek notepad that I use for writing down projects. And it's also, this one's got a handy cheat sheet in the front, so added bonus on that one. But again, pen, paper, something to make notes on, keep track of your rows and your stitches, and just general notes of like what size hook you're using, for example, and what yarn you're using. Having a sharp pair of scissors, just a small pair, that, I mean, you can see from the size of the scissors to my hand, a little pair of great, nice and sharp, keep them just for yarn so they don't get taggy. Like from cutting paper, etc. So a nice pair of scissors, that's useful. And then some needles for weaving in your ends and for sewing pieces work together. There's lots of different sorts of blunt needles for using with yarn. I've got two different types here that I use regularly. I've got the sort that have got a little plastic loop at the end, so they're easy to put your yarn through. These are Pony brand, I think, those ones. And then I've got more of like a sacking needle type needle that have got, can you see a flat bent end to them and a big eye? I find those really useful, especially when doing amigurumi, because you can get in and through the stitches a lot easier with those. So those tend to be the ones I use the most. Pop those back in my little pin cushion. And then different types of yarn, because you can't make anything with crochet if you haven't got something to use. So I'm going to be using for this tutorial for doing slipknot part this pink cotton. I've chosen it because it's a light but bright colour. That makes it easier to see the holes in your stitches as you're learning. There are lots of different yarns made from different materials, wools, man-made materials, cotton, silks. The list is endless now, what you can get threading. It's brilliant. So there's that one. That's the one I'm going to be using today. So I'm going to pop that down there with my hook. There's also another option you can use. This one's an acrylic. It's a nice bright green shade, this one. That should be, again, nice and easy to learn with. Really cheap yarn's not brilliant because you'll find it splits more. So a slightly better quality yarn is my go-to for learning with. But again, light and bright. Definitely light and bright. So I'm going to put that one to one side now. You can use a dark yarn, but you'll find that it's much harder to see where you're working your stitches into when you're learning with the dark yarn. And also you need really good lighting conditions for working with the dark yarns, because otherwise you just physically can't see where to put your hook into the stitches. Another thing to avoid when you're learning is multicoloured yarns. This one is one I hand dyed myself. It's a lovely yarn. It's a cotton again, but it's going to make it harder for you when you're learning to see your stitches if you're having to work around different colours. Just make it simple for yourself. When you're practicing, keep it comfortable, keep it simple, and stick with a plain, pale or bright coloured yarn. And again, something that's not too cheap so it doesn't split too much. I'm going to pop that one over there and bring that one back. Firstly though, before you get crocheting, you need to make sure you're really comfortable, sat somewhere comfortable with good lighting, somewhere where you're going to feel comfortable without having to worry about being a bit achy and stiff, because that's going to distract from your learning of your stitches. So definitely make sure you're comfortable, get a drink to one side, anything you're going to need, and get settled in before you start to crochet. Which leads on to please remember to do hand exercises. When you're learning particularly, you'll find your fingers and wrist joints can get quite stiff, and because your body's not used to moving your hands and fingers in the manner you're going to be using for crochet. So give your hands a good stretch before you start to work, push them together, wriggle your fingers, rotate your wrists, stretch each finger out and thumb out, and give yourself time to make your fingers and wrists feel a little bit more flexible before you start to work. It doesn't take you very long, but it does help, and it will stop some of that discomfort you get. And take breaks regularly, do small, manageable bite-sized pieces of crochet at a time, especially when you're learning, because you can get a bit stiff and uncomfortable. So yeah, get yourself comfortable, get your hands flexible, get yourself some nice plain bright yarn, get yourself a nice comfortable hook that you're happy with, and then it's a case of working out what works for you. As I said earlier, am a knife grip holder for my hook, which means I hold it in the palm of my hand. Other people will use a knife grip. Now that one gives you a more upright position, held as if you were going to be writing with your hook. I don't get quite so much control with that method, and I find I get more wrist ache, so I stick with holding my hook in a knife grip in my right hand because I'm right-handed, and my yarn that I'm working with goes on my left side in my left hand. Now if you were left-handed, you'd be doing this the other way round. Your hook would be held in your left hand, your dominant hand, and your yarn in your right hand. We'll go on to tensioning techniques in another video, but today we're just going to do the slip knot, so we don't need to worry too much about tension at the moment. But you tension with your left hand usually and hold your hook in your right hand if you're right-handed, vice versa if you're left-handed. For doing a slip knot, you need to find a reasonable length of tail for your yarn. I sort of go for about 20-25 centimeters, and I keep that to my left and my yarn to the right at this point, just while we're doing the slip knot. Once you've got that nice long tail, I pinch that yarn tightly at the moment between my index finger and my thumb, and that just means it is controlled whilst I'm making my next part of the slip knot. I take the working yarn, which is the part that's attached to your yarn ball, crossing that over. I'm going to then just gently, lightly hold it with my ring finger. I take the yarn back under my hand, like so, and then I tuck that under my thumb and make a cross. Now there's lots of different ways of doing this, so I'm forming a cross. So I'm going to do that again. I take my long tail of yarn, I hold that in a pinch there, take it over, around, under, and over again. This time you can see that the cross has gone towards the back man. Along if you're forming that nice cross and that the yarn that's attached to your ball is on top. You then take your hook, slide it under the first yarn, which as you can see can be a little bit tricky to start with, under the first yarn there, and you want to hook onto the yarn that's nearest your hand. Now you pull that out so you get that little tiny loop. You rotate your hook through into that loop. Once you've got to that position, rest your finger onto your yarn. Can you see I've just now moved my ring finger and my thumb down to hold onto the tails of my yarn, so my working yarn end and the tail of my yarn, and I'm going to then gently wriggle my fingers out. It looks tricky, but you'll get there, I promise, whilst holding on to those two ends of the yarn. I then pull down with those and back with my hook, which is formed a very loose knot there, because there's like a little noose there. So then you pull on your, whilst holding the tail yarn, you pull the yarn that's attached to the ball yarn just so you get a nice loose loop on your hook. So you want to be able to move it up and down your hook there without any trouble at all, because otherwise you're not going to be able to work back into that afterwards. So if I take that off my hook and then pull it undone, if you pull it apart, look, it's not a permanent knot. You can undo it, redo it, and just keep practicing that. So it's just a case of forming that sliding loop by making a cross, tucking your hook under, grabbing that loop there, pulling up, letting go, and then sliding it up. It will take you a bit of practice to get that right, and you might find a different way works for you, but I found this one gives me a nice knot quite simply, that then I can use to start doing my chain from. If you find that I'm going too fast, you should be able to use a playback option to be able to slow this down so you can see what I'm doing. But basically I'm forming a cross, putting my hook under the first one, catching the second one, and pulling up a loop, holding on to it, wriggling my fingers out, pulling on the two ends, working and tail, and then pulling up on the working end to form that nice loose slip knot. And that is your basic then for being able to go on to doing your chain stitches, which we'll talk about in my next video. Thank you for watching. If you've got any questions, please leave me a comment, and I'll try my best to answer them for you. Thank you. Take care.